This is Art Sense, a podcast focused on educating and informing listeners about the past, present, and future of art. I'm Craig Gould. On today's episode, I speak with Daniel Walbidi, an extraordinary indigenous Australian artist whose work bridges the spiritual and ancient wisdom of the desert with contemporary artistic expression. The one-on-one discussion with Daniel provided the unique opportunity to connect through the common language of visual art with someone nearly 10,000 miles away. In the conversation, Daniel and I discuss his creative process, the significance of his cultural heritage, and the importance of place in his art. We also explore the meditative nature of both producing and experiencing art. Our conversation centers around his latest show, Yurlupirti, Forever Without End, Eternal, which is the inaugural exhibition at Delan Contemporary's new space in New York. This exhibition features 10 new paintings that delve deeper into Daniel's personal beliefs and cultural perspectives, highlighting the fusion of coastal and desert environments through a vivid and layered abstract style. And now, a conversation about the profound connection between art and heritage with Daniel Walbidi. Daniel Walbidi, thank you so much for joining me this week on the Art Sense podcast. Daniel, you currently have a show up now through the end of May at Delan Contemporary's new space at 25th East 73rd Street in New York. Daniel, there's an interesting question that I like to start with when I'm talking to artists. Let's say you're sitting at a dinner next to someone you've never met before. They have no idea who you are or what you do, and you say you're an artist, and they start asking you questions. How do you describe to them the nature of your work?
Well, I've been in those kind of situations a few times. But I tend to describe myself as being a contemporary indigenous artist, mainly because, our art movement in this community, the Bijidenga art movement, the Bijidenga Yurlupirti artists have started. It was like a late kind of introduction to the art world, or to the art of painting, world of painting, the indigenous kind of world of painting. We were just a recent kind of, like I said, a recent movement compared to the movements in Central Australia, the Pupanya Chula movement, and to the art practices north of here in the Kimberley region and Arnhem Land and all those long established art practicing communities. So we're a recent movement, and because we're a desert oriented people, my grandparents on both sides of my family, my mother's family and my father's family, are desert oriented people. What I mean by that is they were actually living that nomadic life. My father was actually born out in the desert, so he spent his early years right up until he was about 11, I think 10 or 11, until his family migrated to the coast. And our style of painting is quite different from many of the other desert producing, the art movement within the Central Australia and many other desert communities. I guess we're a recent movement. We were a recent movement compared to them back then. So we were more sort of, we didn't paint so much the iconographic stuff, the desert iconographic symbols that you'd normally see in Pupanya Chula and many other desert communities or desert movement. But the main subject was land and how we are connected to land. We had certain elements that resembled the iconographic desert, style of painting. But I guess we were different. we see ourselves as a different kind of movement as well.
In preparation for this conversation, I tried to do some homework, and I found a documentary from probably a dozen years ago where your people from Bidadengo were going back to the ancestral country, what would be a 4-day journey, and many of those people hadn't been in a generation. And
yes,
it just, hearing you describe your work and the work of your community, a lot of times when I speak to artists, painters will talk about the importance of place in their work and how place winds up being integral. But I think when we talk about the work of your country and your community, it's not just about place, it's also about memory and memory of place, right? Because in a lot of ways, it's not literal. It's about a memory.
Yes, it's more having that, not only memory, but also the connection, because memory connects us to certain aspects of our lives. Maybe the past, memories connect us to certain people, places, certain time, certain event. And if these memories are very strong and prevalent, that means we are still connected to that time and place or that certain individual. So there was a strong connection. And that connection manifested itself when the old people approached this certain place, water hole, or what we refer to as jila. Jila means a living water hole, a sacred water hole. It's like a home to people, our desert people. So, and that manifested in great emotion. Itself, connection to country, the connection sort of manifested itself in tears. The old people cried, they wept. But I guess it was a mixture of being saddened, and also being happy that they were reunited with country and home.
So tell me, how did it come about that painting emerged? I mean, were your ancestral people, when they were in the middle of the desert, were they a painting people? Or is that something that your community has grasped onto in this time that you're on the coast?
Well, it is a very ancient tradition, painting, because nowadays we sort of convey the stories that would normally be painted on the ground or painted on the body, or designs would be painted on the body, ceremonial purposes or ritualistic purposes. And, even if it's just for dancing or rites of passages, people would paint on the ground to tell stories, sand drawings. And, but I guess being introduced to paint and to canvas, I think the old people and many other artists likewise have conveyed those ancient practices or ancient designs onto canvases and sort of manifested in that way.
Where do you start with a painting? Are you led in with a thought of geography and the landscape in terms of how things are laid out, or at this point is your work more abstract? How do you see your work? Where do you start with your process?
Well, you probably would have seen most of my work, my paintings. Yes, you've probably done your little research.
Right.
You'd probably see in most of my paintings the central circle. I'd start with that first. I normally start with that thing, because circles mean a place, a water hole, or a certain place, a place of significance. And so I'd start with the circle. and then I'd proceed with that. Our old people, they have an encyclopedic knowledge and understanding of how the land is, whether it's walking, they could see things from above. So, like a bird flying in the sky, like an eagle, it has perfect vision, and it knows which place is next. So that encyclopedic knowledge comes from, living being born and brought up on country. And I remember sitting with old people, and they'd be telling us about the layout of the country and how far each place is in between. What is the songs that are connected or stories are connected to country.
It's interesting. I used to teach art history, and there was work I would show my students that was from the peoples of Polynesia. They would travel by catamaran from island to island, and their artwork was like a map, but it wasn't a literal map. It was to remind you when the shape of the water changes, you need to navigate in a different direction. And it just reminded me that, your ancestral country, it's so flat and so far from what we would consider large landmarks that they must have had, so many tiny things, for navigation, and there were sources of stories and, one watering hole versus another, right?
Yes. Well, I guess it's because of countless of generations of ancestors, have lived on the country and walked on the country. So I guess it's just having that physical connection. I mean, you talked about the Polynesian people, and I think all indigenous cultures have that fundamental connection to land and country that transcends different cultures and different people and the different environments. So having that connection to land, to sea, or sky is I don't actually know how to put it, but it's a fundamental thing.
Like I said, your ancestral people are very far inland, but you have grown up Bedadenga on the coast.
Yes.
How does that interaction with water enter into your work?
Yes, well, you must understand that my ancestors were, like I mentioned earlier, they were desert-oriented people. And being out in the desert, there's very little water, except during when it rains, the great, monsoons, or they bring the rain and water, and water is plentiful. But then when it comes down to the driest times of the year, water is very important. It's vital. So water is like religion to us, to many people, many desert people. Without water, one can't survive. It's fundamental rule. But being on the coast, it has influenced my art as well, because I was actually brought up on the coast, and I see this country, the Karajari country, which the community is built on, is home to the younger generation like myself. But it has had a great influence over me.
Your paintings, I've been looking at the work at this latest show, and they're just breathtaking. And your use of color, and even the jillas, the watering holes. I mean, someone doesn't need to know what is represented in the paintings to have an interaction and be moved by your paintings.
Well, normally I tell people, be still, be calm and patient, and the painting will manifest itself to you. Just a teaching of our old people. because we were always taught by our elders, but never to ask questions, but to absorb and watch and see.
Is it a meditative process for you? If we were being asked to be calm and to be still, is that where the work is being generated? Do you ask yourself to be still and have the inspiration come over you in the creation?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I tend to try and not so much shut myself out from my surroundings, but try and get into a meditative state. Even myself, I have to be still and quiet. I guess it's just a state of, not only a state of mind, but it's a state of being.
Is there a particular hope that you have for your art practice? You've been able to travel around the world to share your art with people in different cultures. Is there something particular you would hope someone would take away, or questions they would ask?
Well, I would like them to take away an understanding of the Aboriginal culture and what it means, the significance of our connection to country, and why it is very important that we maintain our connection to country. Many indigenous people are connected to country because it's who they are. We are part of the land. The land is within us. We don't hold a piece of paper that states that, or I guess you could say deeds that connect us to country. Respectfully speaking. I guess for indigenous cultures, it's a very, very different kind of connection to country than the Western world, because it's an ancient connection.
How do you feel about the reception of indigenous art in the contemporary art world, both within Australia and internationally? What changes have you noticed over the course of time that you've been working?
I think it sort of challenges the perception, I guess, from being from the iconographic stuff that you'd see to what it is today. I can only speak for myself personally. As an artist, I've made transitions over the years. I've moved from one, I guess, style of painting and progressed and transitions to what it is now. I believe that I have my own voice, but until I further, probably maybe 2 years or 5 years down the track, I probably paint in a different way. So I guess that at least people are open. I see that people are more open and have more freely embraced the Aboriginal art movement from its early years, from the beginning to what it is now. And I guess it's really about reinventing as an artist. But I guess the fundamental things that always remain is our land, our connection to land and sea and water and sky. People may see it as an evolving or a changing form. I follow most of the art centers throughout the Kimberley and different parts of Australia on Facebook. And they always reinventing themselves, always challenging themselves. And I guess, you can always be a traditional artist, but it's it's, it's always good to find different ways of interpreting and, bringing your art forward, and probably it will manifest it in its own way.
So how do you push yourself? What directions do you push? Is it in terms of materials, or just seeking to always push yourself a little bit further?
Not so much the materials, but it's the painting itself. It comes out on its own. I think it sort of conveys itself on its own. I mean, I guess I'm just a channel. My hands are just a channel, and whatever my hand does with the painting or with the certain colors, I rather just let it manifest and reveal itself. Sometimes when I finish a painting, I sit back and stare at it, or sit back in, you know, just look back at the process to the actual final art piece. And even I find myself thinking that, how did this become like this? Or how did I do this? Or what technique allowed me to produce a certain piece of painting?
Sure.
So I try and allow myself, not to restrict myself, but to, I guess, like I said, just be a vessel, or, to convey the paintings, or what becomes a painting at the end result.
Do you do much editing? Is there lots of back and forth, or do you find yourself in the state and in this flow and the rhythm and create the work, and when it's done, or do you go back and edit? Do you quote unquote fix things?
I probably normally would, but then I think, like I said, the painting would speak. Normally, like I said, I'd just sit and stare at the painting quietly, and if it's, you are connected to your art, it's your creation. So I guess having that connection to something that you created, I guess your inner man will tell you that it is finished, so it has been accomplished. And so probably the painting will speak to me. So I allow the painting to speak to me.
Can you kind of explain to me the beginning of your career? What was that moment where someone outside of Biridanga became aware of the work you and the other artists were doing in your community? At what point did it become a reality that art was going to be the rest of your life?
Well, as a teenager, my first ambition was to become a teacher. That was my sole ambition. I didn't have any intention of being an artist. But then, art was part of the curriculum in most schools, I guess, you attend. And we attended art classes, but we actually didn't paint in the traditional manner or in the traditional style. We actually painted still life, fruits in bowls, and all those things. What we refer to as Gadia painting, Gadia means non-indigenous, or what we say man, Gadia painting. But then I read these books about the art movements in Central Australia, Pupanya Chula, art books based on the Kimberley region and the movements up north from where I am, like the Warman Art Center up in Turkey Creek, the Maunjum artists, the Mangati artists in Fitzroy Crossing, and many other people, the Belgo artists, and they're all from the Kimberley region. And so I was fascinated. And I also read books of a great artist, a great lady by the name of Emily Nungware. She was a utopia artist from Central Australia. And her art was very different from the iconographic stuff that you'd normally have, in desert paintings. So I was blown away, and I was I became very interested, intrigued. And it led from then there. And yeah, so I started painting while I was about 16. We didn't have much material. We didn't have materials. We didn't have much by the way of materials. So we sourced painting materials from, we made our own material, boards that we cut out. We primed them with super glue, and then once the super glue set in, then we proceed painting on them. And we started painting, and one of our art teachers saw that we showed some kind of potential. I didn't know what the potential word that she saw, but we sort of showed some potential. So it was through her that we got acquainted with Emily, who's now a good friend and a manager who manages my art. And it grew from there. But she discouraged me, most of us. Painting is very difficult, very hard, to make a living out of painting. Go and be doctors or teachers. But we insisted that we wanted to be painters. We wanted to be artists. So it grew from there. Our paintings were bought and had sort of drew some interest. And I guess the rest is history, really. I've been painting with her from when I was 16, and I'm 40, so it's a lifetime. And it's more than just a working relationship. She's been actually adopted into our family. So we have that kind of mutual respect, and based on culture and respect for each other, and respect for the culture and our law and custom.
So what do you foresee for the future? What would be your hopes the next 24 years?
Well, normally in our culture, we don't look ahead. We live for the now. But I'm just going to keep painting and just continue to produce art. If my paintings have that effect on people, I'm glad that it has an effect on people. I hope it challenges people, and hope it also challenges myself. So,
but Daniel, I really appreciate you taking time out today on the other side of the world to talk to me about your work.
Thank you very much, Craig.
I really encourage people to go out and see your show at Delan Contemporary's space on 73rd Street while it's up. Or if nothing else, look for work online on Instagram or where, even if you're not standing in front of the work. You can't say this for all work, but even if you're not right in front of it, it still communicates. It still evokes an emotion, and I really appreciate your time, and I love your work.
Thank you very much, Craig, and thank you for the interview.
That's all the time we have for this week. You've been listening to Art Sense. You can find the show on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. If you've enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe. And while you're there, please rate the show and leave a quick review. Your feedback is the key to other folks finding us. And if you'd like to see images related to the conversation, read the transcript, and find other bonus features, you can go to cambia.art and click on the podcast tab. If you'd like to reach out to me, you can email me at craig@cambia.art. Thanks for listening.